Najam, great to meet you, man.
Yep, likewise.
So please tell me a little bit about your role at Algo.
All right, so at Algo, I'm a cognitive product analyst. And what that basically means is that any technology that we are hoping to implement or that we do implement that has to do with cognition in some way, whether it's closer to machine learning or natural language processing, I sort of provide my input about how that would best serve our needs and the needs of our customers as well.
When you say that anything that has to do with cognition, is it only with relation to artificial intelligence, or is there something else?
Well, there's more to it than that. Even if you think about human-computer interaction or cognitive ergonomics, to see how well, especially a digital product, fits with our needs, right? So conforms to the way that you expect your eyes to track, or the way that you would best interact verbally with a machine. So any aspect that has to do with that doesn't necessarily have much to do with machine learning, though it is equally as important for a software application.
So that's like user interfaces?
That's right, user interfaces, user experience, those sorts of things taken from the perspective of a cognitive agent looking at the software or interacting with the software.
I imagine that there are plenty, I don't know if this is true, I just imagine that this may be true, but there are plenty of supply chain AI companies. So is there something on the UI or the UX end that differentiates Algo?
One thing that's important and is unique is the ability to interact with and receive information from Algo through text responses, through natural language responses, instead of through a clickable interface like most other software providers offer, right? So if you can ask a very specific question, then that saves you a lot of time that you would otherwise spend looking at reports or, God forbid, actually looking at the data, right? So it's one step even further removed and even more precise in the kind of responses you get. So you ask it about perhaps a very specific product and where it's located or what it's forecast to sell, and you'll get a very specific response. And we also back that up with things that are a little broader than that, where not only do you get that narrow response, a single value, but you also get a report that's perhaps filtered down to information that's relevant to the question you asked, right?
Can you give an example of,
sure.
of a specific question someone may ask and then of a report that may be generated?
Yeah, absolutely. So if someone is asking about the forecasted demand for a specific product, let's say a Nintendo Wii or whatever, right? And it's being sold in a bunch of different countries, and you specify Australia perhaps, and you say, well, there's a retailer there called by the name of JB Hi-Fi. So at this specific location of JB Hi-Fi, how many of a particular product of the Nintendo Wii do we expect a month from now or 2 months from now? And you'll get a very specific answer back instead of having to look at, a table of data or something like that.
You haven't been playing video games for a while, huh? Your reference is the Wii.
Yeah, it's been some time. Yeah, I'm a few generations behind.
All right. So what else makes Algo unique in some manner?
All right. Well, aside from the natural language aspect, just the process that goes into even the forecasts, for example, right? So when it comes to forecasting, the traditional way is to rely on statistics and a bit of sort of human ingenuity and experience to come up with your expected consensus of how much something will sell a month from now or a year from now or whatever the time frame is. Or on the other side of the spectrum, you have organizations or businesses that either use machine learning themselves or subscribe to some other service that provides machine learning based forecasts, right? They crunch the numbers, they have very complex models, that's true. So they don't rely necessarily on statistical models solely. They augment those with machine learning that is trained on their own or even industry data over several years, right? So you have several years worth of data, either your own or your competitors or both, and then you use that to produce an ML-based model of what the future will look like for the products you're interested in. But the way that Algo sort of bridges the gap between the two is that it takes the machine learning model, it runs that based on whatever training data you provided, and then we take that a step further and make sure that that makes sense according to things that models tend not to capture as easily, but particular trends that don't easily reflect or show up in either publicly available demographics or customer-specific business data.
Do you mind giving me some examples of those, of what doesn't show up easily?
So things like seasonality shows up very easily in trends, right? So how much Christmas would affect demand, right? How much Black Friday would affect demand for product, right? So things that are less easy to capture would be something in the news, for example, right? So if there is, I don't know, an election cycle, for example, or if there are if you're talking about electronics, then TV sales go up during the Oscars or during the Super Bowl, right? Those are just a few examples of things that numbers won't be able to really reveal as easily, right? Especially if they're not scheduled events, right? I suppose the Super Bowl happens around the same time and the Oscars do as well, but there are other factors that influence how much a product would be in demand, for example. And then based on that, that's something that an analyst or an expert planner that has been in the industry for a while can point out and adjust in a model that would otherwise not capture that.
From the people that I've been speaking to at Algo so far, it sounds like the customer has a slew of data. They come to you. It's not as simple as this, but they give you the data and then you give them suggestions of what to do to maximize their profits or minimize their losses.
Right.
I'm wondering, is there data that you have that you work with, that you provide, or that you solicit on your own? Or is it the case that all the data that you have is just given to you by your customers? Like, is there a data pool that Algo has, and what is it and why do you have it?
Right, understood. So there are a couple of answers to that. One is that data does come from the customer. That's our primary source of data because it's specific to the customer. But then again, you also have either publicly available records, either for an industry or for demographics in general, right? Maybe location specific, maybe human demographics, something like that. Could be perhaps even something like, I don't know whether we use this specifically, but as an example, you could use information of stock prices, or you could use information of consumer demand using consumer reports or something like that. If you want to take that a step further, it can be augmented with social listening, right? How much social clout does a product have, right? And so all of those can be taken into account. So that is one part of the answer, where we mix what the customer gives us with other sources. Though I think I should mention that we also provide value in a few other ways when it comes to the data, right? Most of the time, one of the biggest challenges that customers face is that they have the data, though it's stored in very different places, different types of database, or even other kinds of filing systems or record keeping systems. And then it's also not clean, right? So either there are a bunch of duplicates, or records don't really line up as well as you expect them to, or some of them are out of date and you have trouble maintaining versions. So that sort of data management is one very important step to make sure that when we run the ML models that we use, that the results don't produce inaccurate values because the data that you gave them was wrong, right? So that's...
Sorry, I want to make sure I'm understanding this. So the data that comes in can be poor because for whatever reason, some companies didn't place plenty of attention on keeping accurate data or data formatted in the correct manner. Like, what is it that makes the data not optimal? Is it's simply wrong data? Is it just that it's in paper form and they need to now take pictures? Like, what is it specifically?
Okay, there are a couple of things, and that was a great question, by the way. So on the one hand, sometimes the data either has gaps in it, right? So maybe sales for a particular store are missing for an entire week or two, or something like this happens, right? Or there's other unusual features in the data where maybe instead of saying that that a particular product was not available or wasn't being shipped, or there's some other exceptional thing happening with shipments, they just mark that product as 0. Or sometimes they mark product inventory in the negatives for technical reasons, even though, of course, you can't have a negative number of a product at a store, right? That doesn't make sense. So there are those sorts of gaps in the data, right? And then there's also the data not being organized in a way that makes it easy to ask a question, right? So if everything is in one big flat table, then asking a specific kind of question isn't easy to do, right?
Isn't or is?
Is not, because you have one gigantic sheet, right, where a bunch of different values are duplicated over and over again because they're just common across so many rows in that table, right? Whereas if that was structured better, then it'd be easier for a human to take a look at those tables and understand it more quickly. But more importantly, it's also easier to run a database query on data that's structured better and automate the process of returning responses and providing answers to questions. So if your data is just unstructured, right, and or is poorly organized so that asking queries or sending queries is difficult, then you probably won't ask those questions, right? Or if you have reports, like actual visible reports and dashboards that require those queries, then you won't produce reports that are actually answering the questions that you have. You'll be creating reports that are convenient to create or easy to create instead of ones that are actually providing real business value.
From Algo's perspective, do they have some sort of cookie cutter or automated approach to solve these issues of blemished data? Or do you then have to go through each one specifically and figure out how to solve it?
We have guidelines, right? We have experienced data engineers that have seen the sorts of issues that customers have again and again. And so they, to some degree, have automations or scripts that they can use to tidy up the data, right? To take care of common mistakes that they see in how data is structured in tables and separate databases. And then you definitely need to add your own ingenuity and finesse to that, so that, because the way that one customer will have their data organized will be different. They'll have different taxonomy, they'll have a different hierarchy of how products are grouped, for example, of how different stores are grouped into regions, for example, those sorts of things. And then sometimes the way that things are organized prevents you from slicing data in different ways, right? So a common example is if, let's say, all TVs is the parent group, and then you have plasma TVs, and you have OLED TVs, and you have LCD TVs and LED TVs, and so on, then that's a one-to-many relationship, and all of those children belong to the same parent, right? But that's not always the case in every kind of grouping. Sometimes you have, for example, let's say different channels that you use to sell your products, whether that's online or in store, or perhaps direct to the customer instead of through a store, or to an enterprise through a specific representative. You have different channels. And then you have different countries that you'd like to keep track of, right? So if you have a specific channel for a specific country, but you also have that for other countries, and you also have other countries for the same channel, then that many-to-many relationship will be more valuable, because you can slice it either way, where you have either every country within a channel or every channel within a country. Then the results that you can produce are better, as opposed to saying, no, we just have countries, and each country has its own channels, but you can't group it the other way around. If your data isn't organized in the right way, then you're probably going to be limited in the kinds of questions that you can ask.
Earlier, you mentioned that one of the biggest challenges is so-and-so, and you said one of, so that implies that there are many. Can you give me another example of one of the largest challenges that a customer may have as they approach you?
Sure. Okay, right. I was mentioning data management specifically, right? So aside from that, they may not know what the quickest path to real value is, right? So on the one hand, you know that you need to adopt digital tools. You may even know which digital tools would be a good fit for your organization. But then, like, where do you start, right? How much do you bite off in the first phase? Sometimes it's not obvious, right? Sometimes there are dependencies where if you, let's say, take care of problem A first and then take care of problem B afterwards, then problem B automatically becomes easier to solve.
Okay.
Right? But that may not be obvious when you begin the process. So that the guidance that I think we provide, where making sure that the customer picks the challenges that A, are relatively easier to solve and actually provide real value sooner, are taken care of first, and B, pick the problems that actually have knock-on effects in other areas and provide sort of synergistic benefits, you could say, right? And picking those first, if possible, sort of amplify the value that they offer, because they also help solving problems that may occur later on.
So this prioritization of problems to me sounds like an extremely personal approach. What I mean by personal, I mean custom or bespoke. And when I get software, I was mentioning this to Amy, when I get software, like let's say Mathematica or Adobe Premiere, I download that, and then I don't have a relationship with Adobe afterward, or Wolfram afterward. With you all, with Algo, how is that different?
It's different because our service is a part of the package that you get. It's not as though it's an optional feature, or it's an add-on, or it's a line item on your invoice. The price tag includes both whatever software you use, whether it's reporting or whether it's machine learning capabilities or clustering or segmentation or anything like that. Our service is a part of it. And in some cases, there may be exceptional situations where what you purchased takes care of 95% of what you do every day, but there are some things that you may do once a quarter or once a year. You may be interested in doing an audit of some kind, or you may be forecasting something that only occurs once a year. Maybe you have a fashion company and you're only doing particular kinds of planning once a season. Then our team can sort of step in and help out with those very specific tasks themselves, instead of just providing this self-serve tool that you can use. So that's one way that our service sort of takes a step or two beyond just providing support for your software.
Najam, thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries.